Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to our weekly beer tasting. This week we're going to do some fall beers, which this week means mostly stouts. I'm joined as always by Karen over in the sound booth, who is Karen just for this week while we do our pumpkin spice latte ale. I'll be honest, I don't like pumpkin beers. I find them abhorrently sweet, overly spicy, cashing in on a fad, and generally terrible. However, I actually don't mind this one, which is quite rare. So we'll be doing the pumpkin spice latte beer, and then we'll be following that up with Snake Lake's Commodore Stout. For those of you who've joined us every week, you'll recall this is a returning beer for us. The Good Morning Vietnam, which I think might be a returning beer for us. I feel like we might have done that like week 2, which is 20-something weeks ago now, which is basically half a year. So good to have it back. It's their winter seasonal, so we probably did it at the very tail end of winter, and now we're going to get back to it at the very start of winter, fall, not summer. You know, I don't want this to be a fall tasting. It's been so nice lately. I actually got out for a bike ride. My hand isn't all destroyed anymore. Anyway, finally, we will finish up with a really cool beer, which is the Black is Beautiful by Cabin Brewing, which is a Black Forest Stout. And a really cool worldwide brewing initiative coming out of Weathered Souls Brewing out of San Antonio, Texas. And we'll get to that when we get to that. So, let's jump right into our Pumpkin Spice Latte Ale by Spectrum Brewing. And this is the Spectrum out of Vancouver, not the Spectrum locally, because they're not in tall cans and the packaging isn't as good as Daryl's. Now, I like these guys for how bizarrely... Karen, you're missing your pumpkin spice latte. Don't sit down. I like how completely random so many of their beers are. And I will admit, every now and then they have a beer that's an absolute train wreck. For those of you who joined us last week, we had a beer that was an absolute train wreck. But no, this is a brewery that does some really quite exceptional flavored beers. Like they did a chocolate milk beer, they did a birthday cake beer, they regularly do a margarita goza, and they do a strawberry, a pink lemonade, sour. They very regularly do really offbeat different flavor profiles, and for whatever reason they always seem to get them just right. So while this is not a style I enjoy, if you ever try to judge a homebrew competition, the spice herb vegetable category is the one that everyone avoids like the plague and whines terribly about having to judge because they're very often monstrous. I actually quite like this. It's pale for a pumpkin beer. Very often they'll do these as pumpkin stouts or pumpkin brown ales, just to give it some more body and richness, to dial back the intense pumpkininess of the beer. This I find actually being a little lighter, being a little fresher. Maybe it's just because it's kind of very early fall. I quite like this. I like this expression. Elizabeth tastes eggnog.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Sure.
Karen, all right?
Vanilla, I think it's like that vanilla spice combo.
Yeah, it's like vanilla and cardamom and clove. Yeah. Does this actually contain pumpkin, or is this just the traditional pumpkin pie spices? Contains milk sugar and natural flavoring. Well, that is not desperately helpful. Actually, there's a surprising lack of information on this can. Interesting. If anyone has, 30 seconds to help out, you could jump on Spectrum's website and see if there's any more information, and see if they actually do include pumpkin in this beer, because I'd be curious to know. Because that is one of the 2 ways you can do a pumpkin beer. Pumpkin spice beers, they've been around for a while. In Alberta, the great granddaddy of all of them is the Alley Cat Pumpkin Pie, which is a beer I have a bit of a love and hate relationship with. I don't think it's the best pumpkin beer on the market by any means, but I like that it's Alberta, and I like that it's really quite well done for a pumpkin beer. To me, they're starting to get a little bit messy. Some of the 10 and 11% bourbon barrel aged pumpkin ales that are just gigantic and just a big sweet mess, I think are kind of missing the point. I like how tight and light this is. Just finished the third of 3 90-minute Zoom classes, ready for any beer. Well, fair enough. Ooh. You know what? The more I taste that, the less I taste pumpkin, and the more I do taste eggnog. That's kind of interesting. I'm not... You know, I actually saw Christmas decorations somewhere the other day up for sale, and it was September. I was very discouraged by that. The Halloween candy's been out for like 3 weeks at this point, which is even worse, frankly. Yeah, Flying Monkeys, they do have their Paranormal Pumpkin. We carried that last year, actually, and that's a very, very good pumpkin beer. Beers that I really do like in that pumpkin category, I do rather enjoy the Alley Cat just because it's the first pumpkin beer I ever had. I quite like the Paranormal Pumpkin for Flying Monkeys. I have a bit of a love and hate relationship with Philip's Crooked Tooth and Crooked'er Tooth. One is just the imperial version of the other. The Crooked'er Tooth is stronger and even more pumpkin-y. Yeah, I don't know. I'm always tentative with pumpkin beers, but I actually liked this one. And also, I was talking with Devin. He was like, "Kyle, you do have to at some point do a pumpkin beer on the show." I was like, "Well, like a Band-Aid, we'll rip it off quick and early, and then we never have to come back to pumpkin beer again if we don't want to."
Smothered in all these syrupy beers afterwards.
Well, and that's just it. Everyone was just saying we'll be buried in syrupy, sweet, sticky beers, and I don't want to be. I don't like those. The reason I chose this over all the others is it's actually quite dry and it's quite light in alcohol, and it's actually one that I've now had on 3 occasions, and none of those occasions have I hated it. I think 3 is probably my limit on that, but one thing I'll ask, and I'll put this out to you, they build this as a pumpkin spice latte ale. Does anybody get any coffee notes on this? Because I'm really struggling to pick up anything coffee-ish. Now, let's be fair, if you get a pumpkin spice latte from Starbucks, it doesn't taste a damn thing like coffee. But I am curious if anybody picks up any coffee notes on this, because I do not. And you are free to discuss it in the comments, but I am not going to talk about the upcoming Spectrum versus Spectrum whatever. I'm just too close to it, and I happen to like both breweries, and I'm not going to get myself in more trouble than it's worth. So, no, we are tasting this Spectrum today, and that's where we're going to leave that. Yeah, it says it contains milk sugars, so I would expect that, yeah, it does contain some lactose. So if you're worried about the lactose, Eric, maybe hand this one off to Terry, because that's not that does have some milk sugar added. And actually, now that I smell it, I do kind of get that milky note. But yeah, no coffee.
Like maybe condensed milk or something like that. That sweetness is kind of like that.
Yeah, like a condensed milk. Yeah, a tinned milk of some kind. I think that's very apt. Yeah, and that's just it. Contains milk sugar. Exactly. One based in Vancouver, one based in Lethbridge, both with the same name. Let's move right along. We're going to do 3 stouts here. Now, stout is, along with bitter, kind of one of the 2 really classic English beer styles. Are there more like barley wine and all the rest? Yes, there are. But if we're going back far enough, it was stout, and it was, at one point called pale ale, at one point called bitter, at one point called, just generally beer, because it was, just generally ale. Because you couldn't use the word beer if you used hops. Beer was unhopped, more like a gruit. So let's jump on to the Snake Lake. Now we have obviously an outstanding relationship with Snake Lake. We are getting 2 new Snake Lake beers on Friday. We are getting the mango version of the Miss Mermaid Session IPA, as well as the, still not used to opening these with my offhand, the Sun Drenched Tart, which is an apricot New England pale ale. So some really, really interesting stuff here. Now this is the Commodore Stout, which I really remember fondly from when we had the Snake Lake tasting. We had Adam on from Snake Lake a few weeks back. Because it's everything I like in kind of an American style stout. Now, stout does have a few variants. We have the Irish stout, which is kind of your Guinnesses. Very often in the can, they will be with nitrogen or carbonated with nitrogen. So they have kind of that fizzy, creamy, cascading head effect like a Guinness. But they also historically actually had a souring yeast added to them. Or rather, they had souring yeast added to a small proportion of the beer, about 3% to 4% historically. That beer would have been pulled aside, soured, and then blended back in to create a lightly tart beer. Now they just artificially acidify Guinness, but more carefully made dry Irish stouts. The reason they're called dry stouts is, they actually add a soured beer component to make the beer less sweet. English stouts tend to use a slightly more attenuating yeast so that they're a little less sweet. And then American stouts tend to be very kind of sweet and luxurious and dense and cakey. And this definitely fits in that category. As some of you who were here, by the way, anyone who joined us last week and is still back for this week, hair on you. You are absolute champions. You really stuck it through. I was going to say, for any of you whose first week was last week, no, you're not back. Anyone whose first week was last week is never going to watch again. But this is not a coffee stout or an additive stout. This is a stout that is just, malted barley and everything else in there. It is not a beer that has been, at all added to. This is, a little bit of hops, water, yeast, and then a variety of roasted sweetened malts. So that's where we get this nice kind of dark, cakey character. And yes, I can still get a lot of complexity out of this without somebody adding 50,000 artificial flavorings to it, like banana and pistachio and nightmares. So, no, this is big, it's rich. The alcohol seems relatively in check. What, 5.5, I would guess? 6. Okay, that's about where in the wheelhouse where I thought it would be. Alcohol's in check. Body's nice. It's got some richness. It's got kind of a nice roast. It's got coffee. It's got chocolate. Actually, quite a lot of chocolate, and like milk chocolate rather than dark chocolate. And then something kind of almondy, which is really neat. Something very nutty in there. What do they say in the tasting notes here? Deep and robust aromas of dark chocolate and espresso. Enough bitterness. Okay, yeah, chocolate and coffee. That does make sense.
That's what that is.
Yeah, you know what? This is one of those things where, next week, spoiler warning, we're going to get really gimmicky again next week. But this is one of those beers where it doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to have a bunch of fancy additives. It doesn't have to be the absolute bleeding edge of brewing technology, or at least of brewing fads. Thank you, pumpkin spice latte beer. It's a really damn good, very simple beer. It's almost more about the things they're not doing to it, and I really appreciate that it's just a very honest, earnest, well-made stout.
The gradient in the head is neat.
Oh, you're getting a really cool gradient on the head?
Yeah.
What are you getting there, Aaron?
Look at the light.
Well, I don't have a lot of head left on mine because I've been drinking and kind of waving it about like faffing about with it, yeah. Yeah, it's...
I'm not sure what that's indicative of, but...
I'm not either, but it looks really neat, doesn't it?
It does look good.
Ooh, here's an interesting question. If you had a stout in Alberta 100 years ago, would it have been American style? I'll be honest, I sincerely don't know, but I'll wager a guess. And my guess would be no. And the reason would be that brewing, especially back then, really innovative beers didn't come along every week. Brewing was very much... If you bought a stout, you wanted it to taste like what you thought a stout should taste like. And to most people who wanted a stout, they bought Guinness. And I'll reference that back to Labatt's Velvet Cream Stout, which was the last widely available commercially made stout, which I think was made, at least in some regions of Canada, into the mid to late 1980s. And it was very much in the Guinness style. It was dry, it was Irish style, it had a souring component. I'm almost curious because for those who don't know, Guinness, the classic Guinness in the black can with the fizzy ping pong ball in there, the nitrogen thing, that's worldwide. That's all brewed as a concentrate in Ireland, shipped all around the world. They add water to it, they carbonate it, away you go. That's the same everywhere. But for every different export market, they make their own version. So very famous versions are the Jamaican version, which if you ever go to the Caribbean, has historically been the only good beer you can drink in the Caribbean. And the Belgian version of Guinness Foreign Export Stout, which is brewed in Belgium. I forget who makes it. I want to say it was Hoig for the longest time made that. And it's apparently the best of the foreign extras. But when Labatt stopped making Labatt's Velvet Cream Stout, they actually kept the license, or gained the license, for the foreign export stout for Guinness. I wonder if the old Labatt's Velvet Cream Stout maybe was just the Canadian version of the foreign export Guinness, but they just call it Labatt's Velvet Cream, because from what I am told, it was very Guinnessy. So my guess would be if you had a Canadian stout in the past, because it tended to be very, let's focus on the classic style, and the classic style of stout that everybody would have known at that time would have been Guinness. I would guess that that would be what you'd get. The American stout style, as we know it today, kind of comes post-1980, post kind of California brewing explosion. If I was going to say the reference example of what I would say is like a very early, very good American style stout from the old days, I'd say like the Rogue Shakespeare stout would be very much in that style. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but Lagunitas for a very long time made a very good lightly sweet American stout. They also would have been like a reference one. Pikes Peak Market, they were actually, Pikes Peak Brewing got started really crazy early. They don't sell them in Alberta anymore, but Pikes is great. I've been to Pikes. They're, as you would be very unsurprised to learn, just outside Pikes Peak Market, Pikes Place Market. It's that style, that West Coast new school brewing explosion, kind of post 1984, is where this kind of American stout style came from. But great question, by the way. Do I know if Cabin is bringing back that crossword puzzle beer? I love that one. I don't. And yeah, Morning Pages. Barry said it's called a widget. It is called a widget. I just didn't remember. Trying to keep a lot of things in my head going at the same time when I do these. Also, the clock to make sure I don't spend an hour talking about Commodore Stout, which, would be one for the blooper reel, but I probably shouldn't do. And yes, the ice cutter. I do want to talk briefly about the Snake Lake seasonals. I mentioned already that we are getting the sun-drenched apricot, or sun-drenched tart, pardon me, the apricot pale, as well as the Miss Mermaid. They actually released like a whole calendar for us of what they were going to be doing for seasonals over the next few months. And we actually pre-subscribed to all of them. So I did pre-subscribe to the ice cutter. So we will be doing that for sure. Okay, I think we answered enough questions. And no, I don't know about the Cabin. Cabin, I'd never know what they're doing until, I text Hayden. I tend to get a little more updates in terms of like what's coming up from of the breweries that I generally deal with. I'd say Establishment and 88 are super on top of like letting me know everything they're doing. Cabin less so, and then Annex, like I have to call them. So yeah, they're really good, but they're not like as on top of letting me know, and fair enough, as say the other two. So I don't know exactly what Cabin's got going on. But the Morning Pages was really good and like shockingly flavorful for like a, what was it, 4% stout? It was very good. Oh, Postscript. That was Annex. Yeah, Postscript Porter. That was their chocolate cherry or black forest porter. Yeah, I'm hoping that'll be back again. It's not the next thing we're picking up from them. I just found out this morning when I'm at Annex, I'm getting 2 flats of their Munich Dunkel, whose name escapes me. But they say it's absolutely fantastic. It's been a huge seller for them. It was actually fast enough selling that I could only get 2 flats. So if you want it, it'll be here Sunday, assuming my car doesn't break down or something. Touch wood. And yes, we'll have that back. Is there a lot of caffeine in these coffee beers? I don't know. That's an interesting question. Aaron, you probably know more about coffee than me. Is cold press coffee more or less caffeine dense?
Cold press?
Yeah.
I don't think it's different.
No? I think it's about the same?
Any caffeine because the process of making the coffee is exactly the same. Isn't
Okay.
Cold press different?
Yeah, so for most coffee additions in beers, they'll use a cold press coffee for a variety of reasons. The first one, it just seems to translate better. Whenever you add anything to beer, it's the reason that really, like, until very recently, almost nobody made strawberry beers, is strawberry doesn't translate, it doesn't survive the brewing process well. Even if the flavor manages to get through, by the time it's done in the beer, it almost comes off tasting artificial, even if you've used real strawberries. For whatever reason, when it comes to beer additions, adding it to beer, you almost always use cold pressed coffee, and I don't know if that's more. Apparently, it's more caffeine, according to Eric, who's just a font of jokes and information. Thank you, Eric. Longer extraction. That does make sense. So yes, for coffee beers, of which we have one tonight, it will have more caffeine and more alcohol at 6.5. So from where I'm standing, that's a win-win because it's been a day. And it doesn't mean it would survive. I'm just speaking in terms of what I've been told by brewers is that cold press seems to do better. It's one of those little tricks that we don't know why it works, but it works a lot better, so we're going to keep doing it, and maybe in 20 years someone will do their PhD thesis on why. But it does work, so we're going to keep doing it. So this is the classic winter seasonal from 88 Brewing. You can tell it's a seasonal because it has this snappy snow jacket on it. And a lot of their one-off beers tend to. Now this is their Vietnamese coffee stout. Now I quite like Vietnamese coffee. I don't know what makes this a Vietnamese coffee stout in particular. I did look at the text sheet. It didn't actually say. It gave me tasting notes on the beer, but it didn't say exactly what they'd done to make it a Vietnamese coffee stout. I do get a lot of vanilla off of this, just right immediately. Aaron, let me pour you in here. Do you get vanilla right away on this, or is that just a really pretty coffee aroma? So Chad says it's almost 5% coffee to make a coffee beer. How did that turn out, Chad? Was 1 liter to 19 enough, or is the coffee still a little muted? Aaron, do you get the vanilla like right away? It's the first thing I get.
Oh yeah. Yeah, like a natural vanilla, like a nice. It doesn't smell synthetic. It's like.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's a vanilla that feels natural. Mm-hmm. And I don't like to keep beating this dead horse, but not like last week's vanilla stout.
Holy shit.
Oh, God, last week was a time. Anyway. Craig's getting melon.
Melon.
Okay. Melon rind, like honeydew melon rind, like lightly bitter melon. I actually had a joke all queued up that someone should check on Craig because he was having a stroke, but actually I did get it in the beer, so I can't really make the joke.
Like after?
Yeah, it's in the aftertaste. Yeah, it's not in the nose at all. I don't pick it up in the nose at all, but it's in the mouth.
At like the back.
Yeah, exactly. It's showing it kind of right to the back. So you added the cold pressed coffee to the ferment when you caged it. Okay, that makes perfectly good sense because you want those delicate flavors to translate through, and nothing delicate survives primary fermentation. Primary fermentation is very vigorous, produces a lot of heat, tends to play all kinds of hell with delicate aromas and flavors. That's part of the reason why we dry hop is if you want those delicate flavors to survive, they can't really go through primary fermentation because it's just terrible for flavor compounds.
I've seen 88 social media. They kind of like push it a little bit as like a breakfast beer.
This? They push this as it's 6.5% alcohol. How is this a breakfast beer? I have one of these. I'm not going to get anything done today. Aaron was saying that 88 apparently, we really need to get you mic'd up for these, by the way. But Aaron was saying 88 lightly pushes this as a bit of a breakfast beer, but I'm sorry, no, well, I would say it is. 6.5%, no, that is not a breakfast, I mean, if I'm going to stay, this is a breakfast in bed, because I'm going to stay in bed the entire day.
Birthday breakfast beer.
Exactly. Well, we've managed to get thoroughly off track tonight. Perhaps not as much as we did last week, but still pretty thoroughly off track. If you were hoping to learn anything tonight, well, I'm sorry to disappoint you.
We make our fifth beer a bottle of Dimetap and see.
Apparently our fifth beer is going to be a bottle of Dimetap, and no, it's not. So, I do like this style. I love coffee beers in general. I think the Good Morning Vietnam is actually just generally one of those... Actually, I had this pointed out to me by Jesse. It's not called Good Morning Vietnam. Everyone calls it that. It's actually called Good Morning for trademark reasons. So it is Good Morning Vietnamese Coffee Stout, because if they call it Good Morning Vietnam, they'd get trademarked to death. But yes, it is just Good Morning. Some mornings need more torque, and this has plenty of torque at 6.5. Yes, that's true. Now that we are, next week will be our last beer tasting in September, and we'll get to what that is exactly in a moment. But Aaron and I spent some time talking about what our Halloween tasting is going to be, and we're willing to take suggestions on that, because we're very curious what people would like to see for Halloween. I mean, I'm not doing Frankenstein beers. As hilarious as that would be, we are never, ever returning to the land of Collective Arts Nightmare Stout. But I'd like to see a fun theme for Halloween, something different. We've already decided we are going to decorate the heck out of this space for Halloween. It's going to be an absolute disaster. Yeah. But we want to have a fun theme. So if you've got something, let us know, because that would be very, very fun. You can put it in the comments here, or you can direct message us. Either way, we want to make Halloween interesting. Maybe not, that god-awful stout interesting, but interesting. Okay, so let us talk a little bit about what we've got coming up for upcoming attractions before we get to the last beer here. We do have a wine tasting this week, and I think one of the more interesting ones, especially if you're on Team Craig and part of Map Club. We are going to go to Languedoc-Roussillon, which you could call a region. It's more like a collection of about 8 to 12 sub-regions, none of which really have anything to do with each other. Languedoc-Roussillon is down in the far south. It's right on the Mediterranean. It's close to Provence. It's kind of a bit of a catch-all. For a very long time, wines like Pied d'Or, you'd see, Vin de Pays d'Oc, and this is kind of that part of the world. This isn't the Vin de Pays country, this is the higher-end stuff. But this was very much kind of the farmland of southern France, where, if you wanted to make a Chardonnay, you wanted to make a Merlot, you wanted to make a Cabernet Sauvignon, but you wanted it to sell for $11.95, you'd go down to the Languedoc, where growing was easy because there weren't, mid-season freezes or seasonal fall hail or what have you. It was just easy to grow. And so a lot of this part of the world for a very long time became very generic, very standardized, very characterless, frankly. But there are parts of the region that actually kept their character all this time. One of those is Limoux. Now, we've talked about Limoux briefly with wine tasting as the original home, even before Champagne, of sparkling wine. This is the Blanquette de Limoux, which is the local kind of specialty. They use the local grape Mosaic, which is grown effectively nowhere else in the world, and they make some really, really interesting wines with it. Lovely, everyday sort of sparkling wine. We're going to taste that. We're going to do one of my favorite wines in the whole shop. This is something where if you came in and said, hey Kyle, I'm having shrimp, or hey Kyle, I'm having oysters or lobster or any kind of shellfish, but I want a white wine for it, I would recommend you this, because it's perfect. So if you're going to hang out with us on Friday night, pick yourself up some shellfish, something, even if it's just like a shrimp ring from Safeways. It will actually go well with it because this is so perfect. It's so mineral, so saline, so interesting. I love Picpoul de Pinet. It's starting to make a comeback on wine bar wine lists, but it's a slow climb. Last up, we have a couple of really interesting reds. We have the La Mériot, which is AOP Corbière. So this is a very interesting blend. This is predominantly Cinsault with some Marcelin. The really interesting conversation we have with this, other than the fact that it's just a lovely, natural, interesting red wine, is the emerging giant that is going to be the Chinese wine industry over the next 10 to 15 years. They grow a ton of Marcelin. This is really the only thing in the whole shop that uses Marcelin, at least uses it in an interesting way. So we're going to talk about Marcelin with that. And then finally, there's the wine that was kind of the impetus for us doing this tasting. This is the Val de Combre's La Lumière. This is actually, technically speaking, from the extreme south of the Rhone, not the north of the Languedoc, but 6 of one, half dozen of the other. It is predominantly Syrah with some Carignan, and we've added it. Really, really pretty. Devin and I opened this of an afternoon sometime last week. Absolutely lost our minds over it. I opened it with Aaron after the beer tasting last week. We lost our minds about it again. Absolutely brilliant, brilliant red wine. This is the impetus for this week. Really fun. Going to be a lot of maps, going to be a lot of learning, but also going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a good week. Now for beers, this is one I've kind of had in the hopper for a while. This is one I've been planning on for a little while. And the first thing you're going to say is, Kyle, don't you keep talking about going away from just doing IPAs and sours? My answer to you is shut up. We are doing IPAs and sours. But we're going to go with a theme. We're going to go with the fruit of 2020, which in the brewing scene apparently is guava, because by God, we've had a lot of guava beers this year. And we've had a lot of very, very good ones. From Zero Issue out of Calgary, we have the Nebula. That is a strawberry guava sour. From Cabin, we have the Pink Popper, which is a guava New England IPA with hot peppers. From Establishment, I believe this is the only returning beer. This is the Superfusion, which is a Katharina sour, a South American sour with pink guava added. And finally, we have Snake Lake's version of the Happy Trails Guava Spritzer IPA. Of course, there are 3 versions of this beer, one by Snake Lake, one by 88, and one by SYC. We only ever got the Snake Lake and 88 versions. Unfortunately, we missed out on the SYC version. So, all of them using guava, all of them kind of following a theme, just really, really fun. So, that is upcoming attractions. Let us jump into the Cabin Black is Beautiful. Now, this is a really interesting movement. Let me finish my coffee stout here. Actually, I should get the comments really quickly here. Scary beers, high alcohol. Craig's Map Club's gonna stick. It bloody well better. Candy and chocolate bar beers. Ooh, that would be fun. A candy and chocolate theme. Oh, remember that. I won't, but please remember that, Aaron. Please know that was last week. You're not wrong, Craig. You're not wrong. Craig, if you want to join me for like doing a companion Google Earth sort of thing, so that we can just completely brand you as Map Club guy, we could do that. You'd never escape it for the rest of time, but that would be fun. Are the Happy Trails different between the breweries? Yes, they are. And the primary difference is actually their in-house yeast strain. So what I'm told is they use the exact same brewing recipe on paper, but all of the breweries were free to interpret it in their own style. So maybe they added the guava at a different time, or maybe they used a different type of guava because there's both pink and green guava. They all use their own in-house yeast, and they all have different in-house brewing practices. So it's going to be very slight differences. For my palate, we only got like 2 flats of the 88 version of the Happy Trails, and I never got to try the SYC. But I find the Snake Lake a little bit more bitter, a little more West Coasty in style, and the guava was maybe played down a little bit, whereas the 88 had more of that tropical fruit note, but wasn't as bitter. And based on what I know about 88 and Snake Lake, that kind of tracks. I think that's very much their in-house style for most of their IPAs. So that does make sense. The 5 cents of being popular before my kids smashed your beer glass with a flying cushion. Well, that's very sad. We're going to get you another can of that for next week. So, the Black is Beautiful beer movement. This was started by Marcus Baskerville of Weathered Souls Brewing in San Antonio, Texas, to support social justice charities throughout the United States and now in Canada for people of color. So, basically, the base recipe was provided, and this label, which is universal to all of them, apart from a little bit on the side it says cabin. The label and the base beer recipe are completely the same for all of the different breweries all across. Well, initially it was just North America, but I've heard there's actually some European versions of this coming out now as well. The base and the label are the same, but what they choose to do with it, and they opened it up and asked people to experiment with it, is different. So they went with a Black Forest Stout in the height of summer. And this made me very sad. This was not a big seller for us for the first bit. I think it'll pick up now that A, we're tasting it, and B, it's colder weather. But every time I went to Cabin, I'd have a pint of this, possibly 2, because it was absolutely spectacular.
It is good.
It's just a wonderful everyday, every day it's 7% alcohol sort of stout. It's got the chocolate, it's got the cherry, it's a little bit desserty, but it's not over the top. Oh God, yes, I like this so much. The fruit is a little muted out of can. I think this has more fruit going on tap, but even out of can, this is really nice. If I had this to do over again, I might have had this before the 88, because the 88's just powerful coffee notes are kind of running roughshod over this. Give yourself a minute to adjust. Let your palate adjust. There we go. It is much better on tap. It is already darned nice out of can, but it is even better on tap.
What's different?
Sorry, Aaron asked what's different. That's why we need you mic'd up. I
know.
But what's different? The fruity sweet notes don't come out to play in the canned version as much as they did on tap. I have to work to find the cherries here. I didn't have to work at all on tap.
It's got a bit of an ashiness.
It does have an ashiness. It's got so there's a variety of different roasts of barley you can use when you're making a darker beer. You can use anything from like chocolate or de-bittered Belgian malt, which is called Special B, right up to like roasted barley, which has a really pronounced ashy malt. There are probably, and Chad can correct me here, I'd say 8 to 12 common roasted or darker barleys that are used to make stouts and porters and dunkels and things. The darkest of those tends to be the roasted barley, which it does impart an ashy note. I always appreciate that, A, because it's underutilized, especially in North American beers, because they want them to kind of come off sweeter, like the Snake Lake Commodore. I'm not saying there couldn't be 1 or 2% of that roasted barley in here, but it's more caramelly, sweet, chocolate bar sort of thing. This has maybe got a little more of that seriousness because of that ashy finish, and I really like that kind of ashy cigar sort of character that comes off of that.
Very much, yeah.
Elizabeth really tastes fresh black currants. I can dig black currants. How do they keep it light in feel? And this is where I do fall down. I am, not a brewmaster. I've been a very successful home brewer a million years ago, but I'm not a brewmaster. How do they get this feel? Well, I'll go from my wine background. Alcohol is a mysterious beast, and it's a very fun thing. Alcohol makes everything taste richer and more luxuriant and more pleasurable right at the point where your tongue, or in some cases your nose, detects it, at which point everything flips. Wow, snapping hurts. But everything flips, and you immediately perceive it as boozy, as sharp, as astringent, as messy. As long as you aren't picking up the alcohol, a higher alcohol will, almost, counterintuitively make the beer seem lighter, make it seem richer, make it seem better, right to the point where you taste alcohol. So one of the great tricks with making anything with an alcohol content is hiding the alcohol. Because the more that you can put on, the more people will actually enjoy it and make it think it's more expressive and richer and brighter, up to the point where you taste it. And all it has to do is get warm in a lot of cases, and now you can taste it. And now the emperor has no clothes, and it's just high alcohol, and now it just tastes boozy, and I don't like it. But I would guess in this, it's just good brewing. It's good, clever brewing. I would guess, based on the reputation of Weathered Souls Brewing, that the base recipe was pretty outstanding. The version that Weathered Souls themselves are brewing down in Texas is actually 10%, so this is actually a lighter version of the same. So I would guess that based on that, maybe this comes off a little lighter, being as it's kind of a lightened up version of an already imperial stout. But that's purely speculative because I'm not a brewer. Chad would be a good person to weigh in on this, actually, if Chad's still around. More milkshake than the... Milkshake's a good way to put that. Yeah, it has a real, density to it, doesn't it? Not sure the camera's picking it up, but there's been a fly flying around for the last half hour that I thought he just got in my glass, but he did not. He just flew by. Low final gravity helps with that. Okay. So a more heavily extracted beer gives you a lighter mouthfeel. Do you want to walk us through that a little bit, Chad, if you're willing? Because I'm very interested by this topic. While we're waiting for Chad to get back to us on that, I'll take rankings at this point, and wow, do I not know where to start with this.
I know what I'm doing.
1 for me, 2, 3, 4. So 3, 2, 4, 1. That sounds like Aaron wildly disagrees. I know, this one you really want it to creep up the rankings because it's so good. 4, 3, 2, 1? Okay.
Like backwards, straight up.
Nice.
Yeah.
3, 2, 4, 1, so you're the same as me. 4, 2, 1, 3. Really? That's interesting. 4, 3, 2, 1. Craig's the same as you, Aaron. 2, 3, 4, 1. So a lot of 2s and 3s at the top. 4 has perhaps not been everyone's favorite, but some people's. And then the poor pumpkin beer. Well, we kind of knew what we were offering it up to.
Sure.
And if I'm being very, very honest, this wasn't supposed to be part of the tasting at all. I was actually going to put the Blind Man Trip Hammer in that spot, and then I cocked up and didn't order it and forgot like an idiot, and that's why we have this instead. And we just went with it because it's what we could do in the time we had. So there's the real reason we have pumpkin beer today. I made a terrible mistake because I'm stupid. But, such is life. The lower the gravity, the drier it is perceived. The high attenuating yeast help get the numbers lower as well as mash temperature. Chad, I hope you never stop contributing to these. That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Terry's face is... Oh. Fave is one. I was going to say, wow, that's either really nice or really mean. I don't know.
Terry's face is one.
Fave is one. Okay, that's much better.
It's funny because Eric was grilling us over a title spelling mistake.
Oh, Eric was nailing us for a title spelling mistake?
Yeah, months back. Beat. Like I said, it was like the virtual beat tasting or something like that. It was bad.
Well, you know, nobody's perfect, including
Virtual
Eric.
Beat. B-E-T. They're right next to each other.
Well, he is famous for his love of root vegetables, so, you know. All right, folks, unless there's any other questions, we will see you in a week, and we will do Guava Week, which is going to be a lot of fun. I hope you enjoyed tonight. I did. I actually learned a little bit about how to make, you know, high-gravity beers and how to make well-attenuated stouts, and we had some really wonderful questions tonight. Thank you so much for your interactions. I always love your questions. And Lorraine says it's got a bit of a buttery toffee flavor on number 1. Yeah, actually, as that warms up, I get more and more like, yeah, kind of those little clear plastic caramel cubes that everyone's grandmother seemed to have on hand all the time. You know, even if they didn't have good candy, they had those caramel cubes. Anyway, I think we'll call that a night right there. Thank you all for tuning in. I'm Kyle with Edward Hilton. This was our beginning to fall, and may we have a much longer fall than we do winter. Beer tasting. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Thank you for joining us, and have a wonderful night. Good night.